I'm going to talk to you real quick. This is actually kind of a prelude to the sermon this morning. But we just wanted to kind of remind you, because you'll kind of hear us talk about it, and we don't want you to be lost. This week is Passion Week, and I know that the traditions that we grew up in, because I grew up in them too, the traditions are that Christ died on a Friday and rose from the dead on a Sunday. And actually, one of the men that we were reading his story about how he didn't believe in Jesus and really went after really studying about the cross and the crucifixion, all the stuff that happened. One of his issues is, and he missed something in this, he did this entire book and he still missed something. We can miss something, can't we? He missed the whole fact that he didn't factor in Jewish holidays, Jewish holy days, festivals, into understanding the Sabbaths. So he still didn't understand how Jesus was buried in the tomb for 3 days, from Friday to Sunday, because that's not 3 days. Anybody can do their math and know that's not 3 days. But even Jesus said that he would be in the belly of the earth, just like Jonah was in the belly of a whale for 3 days. And so one of the things is, well, Jesus didn't tell the whole truth. He didn't lie, people. He didn't lie. And so if you go back and actually understand a little bit about the Jewish feasts, this gives you an understanding that the Passion Week and the traditions that we grew up in are not fully accurate, because what they didn't take into account was Jewish custom. They just they're looking at things. There's a Roman calendar and there's a Jewish calendar, and they're two different things. And they took it from the Roman calendar versus the Jewish calendar. So I just want you to see this real quick. I'm going to explain this. But Tuesday, they were preparing for the Seder meal. This week is actually more accurate to what would have happened. Tuesday is the preparation for the Seder meal, and at sundown is when Passover began, and Tuesday actually becomes Wednesday at sundown. So Roman calendar, our Wednesdays and our Tuesdays switch over at midnight, but for them it's sundown. So, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And so they have a totally different calendar of the way they see things versus our midnight to midnight thing. So Tuesday would have been the Seder meal and the preparation for that, and then Passover began. Passover is the celebration of the angel of death that came through Egypt, and then it spared the Hebrews because they put blood on the doorpost. Okay? And there's a whole other symbolism I'll teach on that eventually too, because it's really cool, because the blood of the doorpost actually is the symbol of the cross. It's awesome. Awesome teaching. So Wednesday night, Wednesday is technically the Passover, and it is a Sabbath. In Jewish culture, their Sabbaths are not just the Friday night. Sabbath is the day of rest. They can't do any work from Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. But every Jewish festival, which lasted for a full week, 7 days, the first day of the festival and the last day are Sabbaths. And so you'll see in the Bible the word Sabbath used. It's not always talking about the Friday night Sabbath. It could be talking about the festival Sabbath. You have to know what they're talking about. So you have to go in and study a little bit more and find out what they're talking about. So the Last Supper took place Wednesday. The Garden of Gethsemane, the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion, the death, the burial, all of this took place technically on Wednesday. Okay? And Jesus becomes the Passover lamb. So on the day of Passover, their first Sabbath of this feast, this is when this is also the reason why, do you ever wonder why, and if you go really look in this, the Sanhedrin had their own soldiers. They could have gone and crucified Jesus themselves. Do you ever wonder why they didn't do it? It's because they couldn't. Why did they make Pilate do their dirty work? Because they were on a Sabbath and they couldn't lift one finger. That's why. They got someone else to do their dirty work because the entire week was a festival and there was 3 Sabbaths back to back. It was just constant. And so they could do nothing. That's why. So they used the Romans to do their dirty work. That's what they did. Thursday. Thursday is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now if you look at this, you'll kind of understand. It's just kind of laid out for you to understand it. Thursday is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay? Again, this is a Sabbath because it's part of the festival. Jesus is in the tomb at sundown Thursday, and it becomes Friday. So this is the full day he's in there. So he's gone in the tomb on Wednesday night before the sun went down because the Sabbath began then. They had to get him in the tomb. So Wednesday he died at 3 in the afternoon. He's buried, he's put in the tomb, and all that's done. But because the Sabbath is beginning, remember the women said they couldn't put the oils on him and get him the way that they prepared, the way they wanted to. It was because the Sabbath was coming and they didn't have time. So they get him into the tomb, he's buried. Thursday, he's in the tomb the whole day. Friday, at sundown on Friday, so now we are coming right into that third day. At sundown on Friday, okay, here's the second full day. Now, this is the preparation for the Sabbath again on Friday. In the middle of this day, this is where Mary and Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome had to go and buy sweet spices so that they might come and anoint Jesus. This is in Mark 16:1. And this is where the weekly Sabbath begins at sundown on Friday. Now at that sundown, we are at 3 days. No, sorry, we're at 3 days at the sundown of Saturday. I'm sorry, I'm one ahead of myself. It can get confusing, sorry. So we're at 2 days right now. 2 full days he's been in the tomb at the sundown of Friday. Now we come to Saturday. They can't do anything. They bought the spices, but they still can't go and put them on Jesus because they're still in the middle of their Sabbath, their day of rest. They can't lift a finger. Remember I talked about the law, how they couldn't even push an elevator button, some of the Jews now? Can't even do it for themselves because the law is so tight on them. They cannot lift a finger. Well, they can't even go and put spices on his body. So they have to wait till Sunday morning. Sundown Saturday night, technically, is when Jesus rose from the dead. But the tomb didn't roll away, the stone didn't roll away from the tomb until the morning. So what was Jesus doing those few hours? We don't know. That'll be a question I'll have to ask when we get to heaven. What were you doing those couple hours? What were you doing through the night? Who knows? Just remember, he was bringing people out of paradise too. Who knows what he was doing? He had stuff to do. Doesn't mean he was in the tomb. The stone just didn't roll away to show that he wasn't there anymore. So Saturday is the end of the Sabbath, or it is technically the finish of the Sabbath. So Saturday night he arose. And just Matthew 12:40 is where it says, for Jesus would be in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth, just as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days. So just remember those little tidbits, because I know that people still celebrate Good Friday. That's fine. You can celebrate it all you want. But, you know, the amazing thing is Jesus didn't die on a Friday. He died on a Wednesday. So I know it can be kind of confusing. That's why we don't, as a church, usually do something on Good Friday. Because technically, it's not Good Friday. It's Wednesday. So he was in the grave. Why is this important? You know, it is important for a couple reasons. First of all, there's a lot of arguments right now about whether or not Jesus' death and resurrection were actually accurate. One of the reasons why people argue that is because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell the story a little different. You know, the interesting thing is, though, there is a gentleman he was a detective, and this is actually a movie coming out right now. In the process, it's called The Case for Christ, and he gave his life to the Lord afterwards, but he was he was just a defiant atheist before he started. He was very, very angry and wanted to prove this wrong. But the more he got into it and understood how eyewitnesses see things, and that they do see things differently, the more he found out how accurate their testimony was. And the evidence, the archaeology of it is incredible. The cross of Christ was not an accident. So today I'm going to talk to you about the case for the cross. I'm going to talk to you about the victory that Jesus gave us. The cross of Christ was not an accident. There was a purpose behind it, a full intention by God. It wasn't some accident, and that's something I actually heard somebody say, well, you know, Jesus just died because they got mad at him. Listen, everything that Jesus did from before he even came in the womb of Mary, God had a plan, and it was planned down into the more I see the detail, the more I'm shocked, and then I'm not shocked at the same time. God had incredible detail. You guys, we think we plan well. God sees all, and he plans way better. He sees all, so he plans down to defined detail. And when you see those details, it is shocking. It's like, wow, God, this was not an accident.
Right.
Jesus came with a purpose. Mm-hmm. He came with, his whole life was a purpose. If you think your life is an accident, you need to go get a hold of God and find out who he really is. He does nothing by accident. There's no such thing as an accident with him. Right. He has divine purpose, and you're in it.
Yes. Amen.
Believe it or not,
right.
But you are. And Jesus came to this earth with a divine purpose. Colossians 1:20. I'm not doing a huge section of scripture. I got a lot of scriptures. So I'm going to let Michael pull those up. Colossians 1:20. This is in the Amplified. And God purposed that through by the service and the intervention of him, the Son, all things should be completely reconciled back to himself, whether on earth or in heaven, as through him, the Father, and made peace by the means of the blood of his cross. So God had a purpose for the cross. He had a purpose for Jesus' blood. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't something that just happened because they hated him. There was a purpose behind it. John 3:14 in the Amplified says, and just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert on a pole, so it is necessary that the Son of Man be lifted up onto the cross. To some, the cross of Christ is just a mistake. It's just some foolish story that's been told over years and years and years, and somebody's tried to make a religion out of it in order to keep people under control. Yeah. To others, it's a fake story that's made up. The Quran actually states that Jesus never died on a cross and that God sent another person looking like him in his place. Excuse me? That's why I say, and I will say it, that is the most foolish thing, most foolish junk I've ever heard. Because that's just weird. Okay, really? God's really going to do that? Come on. That's not even in his character. But again, you're talking about people who don't know God's character. Historians and many scientists have proven that Jesus died on the cross and that the tomb is empty. They have a hard time explaining that, but they know it is and they can't refute it. The evidence far outweighs the skeptics' opinions. 1 Corinthians 1:18 in the Amplified says, for the story and the message of the cross is sheer absurdity and folly to those who are perishing and on their way to perdition. But to us who are being saved, it is a manifestation of the power of God. To us it's precious. To us it's important. To us it's salvation. To us it matters. But to the world, it's absolute absurdity and foolishness to them. Why would your God come down and subject himself to the cross and die for anybody, especially for people who don't even want him? Love. And the world still doesn't understand it. They sing all the songs, love makes the world go round. They sing all these songs about love, and they have no concept of love, because love is that cross. Their idea of love is lust and fat babies with wings. And their idea of love is so weird, but it's not the cross, and that's love. God's love is so different from the world's version of love. We have Valentine's Day and everybody, oh, I'm so in love when we give out roses. Where's the cross? God's way of loving us was the cross. Totally a different way of seeing love. He laid down his life. Whether you believe the cross by fact or by faith, the cross of Christ is truth, and it had a purpose. You can look at all the facts. I love the faith of it, but I also love the fact that it can be proven by fact. I'm glad it can, because there are people out there that cannot just take anything by faith. They can't, even though they can sit on a chair and have faith that that chair is not going to fall on you. They have more faith than they think. But they just, I gotta prove it. I gotta. So you know what? God gave them all the science too. Just because God knew all of us. He knew some people could take it by faith and some have to have the facts. Ephesians 2:16 in the Amplified. And he designed, I want you to keep that word in your mind. God designed a plan. He designed to reconcile to God both Jew and Gentile, united in a single body by the means of his cross, thereby killing the mutual enmity and bringing the feud to an end. Now hold on a second. What feud? What is the feud he's talking about? What's the battle that's been going on? Well, first off, if we're going to talk about this feud, we got to go back to the Garden of Eden, because whenever you do a case and you look at something and you try to figure out exactly what happened, you have to go back to the beginning of the story, right? You can't really go in the middle and think you got all the evidence. You got to go back to the beginning. Well, the beginning is not Palm Sunday. Even though we look at Passion Week and here's Palm Sunday, Jesus is riding into Jerusalem, here's the beginning of all his problems. No, it's not. The beginning of the problem is the feud that started in the Garden of Eden. That's where the feud began. Adam and Eve have been created perfectly in a garden. They live in paradise. They never had a mom and dad who abused them. They were never hurt. They were never wounded. They were never offended. They've never been sick. Imagine that. They've never had anything wrong with them. The devil has come to them in the form of a serpent, which I still can't understand the whole snake talking to me thing. Because I would be like, chop your head off. You know, first of all, you're a snake. Second, you just talked to me, you're gonna die. I mean, I am a woman. Me and snakes don't mix. What Eve was thinking, I don't know. But the serpent is talking to her, coaxes her into eating this fruit that looks so wonderful, lies to her, gets her to eat this fruit. Now we have her giving it to Adam, and we have the fall of man. They have hidden from God. God has come and showed up. All of this has happened, and here is this conversation in Genesis 3:15. This is the Amplified. And this is God talking. He's dealing with Adam, he's dealing with Eve, and now he looks at the serpent. So he's dealt with his creation. Adam, this is what's going to happen to you because of the fall. Eve, this is what's going to happen to you because of the fall. And you, little serpent, what I'm going to do to you, and this is what he says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman. That was probably why women hate snakes from this day on. Is exactly why. Because God put enmity there. And between your offspring, whose offspring? Satan's. The snake had offspring. He's not talking about the serpent here, he's talking about Satan. So Satan had offspring, remember that. Between your offspring and her offspring. And if you look at this in the Amplified, her offspring is capitalized with a big O, because it's talking about Jesus. And her offspring. And he will bruise and tread your head underfoot. Amen. And you will lie in wait and bruise his heel. Remember this verse, it's going to come back up. Revelations 13:4 says that the Lamb was slain from the foundation of the world. How? How did God, that can almost complicate it right there. That Jesus was slain from the foundation of the world. So before it ever happened, it happened. Why? Because God had an intentional plan. When God created humanity, he knew already that we were going to fail and that we were going to fall and that we were going to sin and things were going to happen. And he knew he was already going to have a plan in place. So before he ever breathed life in Adam, he already set it in motion. And you know what? This is what blows my mind. He still gave Adam free will.
What a bummer.
Even though he knew all of this, he still gave him free will. That's love. Even when you know someone's going to fail you and you still give them the space to let them do it.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Mothers could say that.
And this is exactly why universalism and the teaching of universalism is wrong. Because if God redeemed us without our own choice in it, he takes away our free will.
Mm-hmm.
Do you catch that? If he was to redeem us, and it was done all once and for all, and nothing that we chose had anything to do with it, then he again has stepped in and taken our free will. And he wouldn't even do that in the garden. So that kills universalism right there. Because God has still given us free will. We still get to choose whether we believe in the cross of Christ or the tomb. We still get to choose. It's our choice. But Jesus didn't die at the beginning. So this still blows my brain. But God had a plan and he set it in stone. He knew that Jesus would lay down his life, a ransom for many. Why the cross? Why this specific kind of death? Why was this death the one that was picked? Jesus could have died any other way. He could have had his head chopped off or whatever, all the other ways that all the disciples died. Why not one of those? Why was this one picked? God knows, because of all the little details. It's all the details. It's all the things that he redeemed. See, God knew when mankind sinned, we gave up so much. We have no concept of what was really given up. The dominion. The amount of power that we were given from the Father, and we gave it up for a piece of fruit. Really for our own control is what we did. And we don't really understand, but God had to put all these little details in place because he needed a redemption that was complete. And in some ways, Jesus overpaid the price, but he did it on purpose because then nobody could say he paid it halfway.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
He paid all of it. It was a big deal. The Lamb chose the cross from the foundation of the world. And when man was being created, he was even imprinted with the cross. I'll show you something in a minute. You were imprinted with the cross in your DNA. So from the foundation of the world, the cross was a plan, and it was actually implemented in Adam's DNA. The cross is actually there. And the cross isn't just a symbol of God's mercy, but it's the very thing that holds us together.
Yep, it surely is.
So this plan was a lot further than Palm Sunday. It started back before Adam was ever breathed into. I want to show you something if you pull up the picture of the laminin. Laminin is the glycoprotein component of connective tissue basement membrane that promotes cell adhesion. In English, American language, Jastism, this is the stuff that holds you together. It's the glue in your cells. It's just the easy way to put it. This is your glue, and it is in every body. Would you show the other picture too? And when they put it together and they do it in their scientific picture, this is what it looks like. It's a cross. The cross is the very core of our beings. Without this glue, you would fall apart. Your face would look like Picasso if you didn't have this. Because this holds your cells together. This makes your body stay where it should. My arm is where it is because of the laminin in my cells.
That's good.
It's not down by my foot hanging somewhere. It's right where it should be because of the glue in these cells, the laminin. You can run away from Christ, but you still can't get away from him because his sacrifice is imprinted in your DNA.
Thank God.
So from the very beginning of the world, the cross was imprinted into Adam. We can't get away from his sacrifice. You can run all you want. The cross is inside of you,
Amen.
whether you like it or not. And Jesus gave it to us. It's actually a gift. But we have a choice whether or not we receive it or not. Because God gave us free will. So every Passion Week, for 40 years, I have heard a sermon on the death of Jesus. During this week, whatever it be. Palm Sunday, we talk about the day that he rode into Jerusalem. And they waved palm branches. They said, Hosanna. And I remember growing up thinking Hosanna meant hallelujah, that they were the same thing. You know what? That's not what it means. Hosanna in Hebrew actually means save us. We emphatically cry out with all of our might, save us. But you know what most of the Jews wanted saved from? Not their sin. Most of them wanted saved from Rome. And they were angry because Jesus didn't come to save them from Rome. He came to save them from their sin. Because what was really killing them was their sin. Rome was the outside. The sin was on the insides. And Jesus came to deal with the inside first. And that's what they were really frustrated about. And that's why from Sunday to Wednesday their cries changed. One minute they're worshiping him and the next minute they're screaming crucify. Well, we thought you were going to be the king that would save us from the Romans. But you're not that king, so we just decided we're done with you. Amazing how fickle of a crowd can be. That's why you better not live your life trying to please people.
That's right.
Because let me tell you, people turn on you. You better live your life pleasing God, because he's the one that won't turn on you. So every Passion Week for 40 years I've heard a sermon on the death of Jesus. You can become so callous to it. It can be kind of become real old. As a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, they're talking about this again. And I remember as a teenager hearing stories of the details, and I was just enamored with the details of some of it. Not because I like gore. I didn't grow up with any of that kind of stuff at all. But because I wanted to understand what he really did for me on the cross. I'm not going to give you really gory details today. I think you've probably heard them. If you've seen The Passion of Christ, you've probably seen them. That was a hard movie for me to watch. We went to the theaters to watch it. When he got whipped, Matt's sitting there crying. I am literally, every time they whipped him, I sobbed this horrific sob. And I pulled my body into itself and I kept putting my head down because I couldn't handle looking. I couldn't handle it. And it was like when they whipped him, they whipped me. And I just took the reaction of every beat. And I was like, okay, I cannot. I was shaking. By the end of the movie, everyone sitting in there was just tremoring under the presence of God, but in shock. And my pastor's wife and I both had the same response. At the very end, you see Jesus stand up in the tomb, and all you see is the spot in his hand, and you see him stand up, and you kind of see that you realize he's rising from the dead. The stone is rolling away. But it wasn't enough. Yeah. And for us, it was like, that scene wasn't enough. Yeah. I needed more. Yeah. I just watched the death of my Savior, and I needed to see him come out of the tomb. You know, I needed the victory of it. And I just, and so these are just the emotions I went through. I'm not kind of going there with that because I think you've been there. But what I mean is, let's not get callous to what happened. Let's see some other details that maybe you haven't seen. I know they shocked me when I saw them. Another man that I was reading of recently has really wanted to know what happened with Jesus' crucifixion. And so he did things a little different. Instead of going in and just studying the Roman way that they did crucifixion and understanding it, he actually wanted to kind of understand what happened to Jesus, what was going on in Jesus' body during the time of the crucifixion. So we have Palm Sunday. He comes into Jerusalem and he's their king. They've hailed him as king. I always think it's really crazy that Jesus came riding on a donkey, and the first time he came to Jerusalem, he was riding on a donkey in his mother's womb.
Yep.
Now he's riding on the donkey. I always thought it was really wild that God chose a donkey, not a horse, not a mighty thing. He chose something small.
Yeah. And cold. Yeah.
Seems less important. But, so this man, he decides he's going to go to a pathologist, a forensic pathologist. And he wants to hear kind of some details. Some say that Jesus never died on the cross. He fainted. This is what this guy's saying. Or given a drug that made him look dead and then he later revived. This is just some of the stories that people have said. The reason the tomb was empty was because he just lived on. Some have said that Jesus was taken from the cross before he died and then later just healed and revived. Robert, this pathologist, wanted evidence of the crucifixion. So he decided to visit an expert in California, Dr. Metherall. He's a heart, lung, and blood doctor. This is what this doctor said. It began after the Last Supper in the Garden of Gethsemane. Sweat like drops of blood. Hematidrosis. I'm going to read this because this is interesting. Hematidrosis, not common, but it's caused by a high amount of stress and anxiety. Chemicals break down the capillaries in the sweat glands. So I want to read this real quick. This is from Rick Renner. Rick Renner is a Greek scholar. Okay? And this is from his gems on the drops of blood for Jesus. Jesus' emotional state in the Garden of Gethsemane was so intense that it says his sweat was as if it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground. The sweat is the Greek word hydros, and the word drops is the Greek word thrombos, a medical word that points to the blood that is unusually thickly clotted. When these two words are joined, they depict a medical condition called hematidrosis, a condition that occurs only in individuals who are in a highly emotional state because the mind is under such great emotional and mental pressure. It sends signals of stress throughout the body, and these signals become so strong that the body reacts as if it's under actual physical pressure. And as a result, the first and second layer of skin separate and cause a vacuum to form between them. Thickly clotted blood seeps through this vacuum, oozing through the pores of the skin. Once the blood seeps through, it mingles with the sufferer's sweat and then pours out from his skin as a result of this intense inner struggle. And in the end, the blood and the sweat mix together and flow down the victim's face like droplets to the ground. When this condition actually happens, this is the scientist talking again, when this condition actually happens, the skin becomes so fragile that when he was flogged the next day, his skin would have been highly sensitive. More highly sensitive than usual because the blood is already sitting at the surface. The Roman flogging of 39 brutal lashes, 40 kills. So he's right on the verge of death. They whipped Jesus with strands of braided leather with metal balls woven into them. This would have caused deep bruising, breaking open his skin with further blows. And then pieces of bone and glass were tied also to the end of the whip. And this is the cat o' nine tails. His spine would be exposed from the depth of the lashes, and lashes all the way down the back of his back and his legs. Quivering ribbons of muscles and tendons exposed, and arteries exposed, intestines exposed. A lot of people died right here. Before crucifixion, they never made it past this. Pilate more than likely never intended Jesus' crucifixion. He was just going to have him whipped. Right here. Because remember, Pilate didn't want to do this. Because he was warned by his wife not to. The crucifixion came later and he didn't have a choice, and that's why he washed his hands of Jesus. Jesus suffered hypovolemic shock from major blood loss. The lack of volume in his blood. You have 5.5 liters of blood in you. Jesus' blood was literally drained. Do you know what 5 means in the Greek? Grace. So when Jesus poured out his blood for you, he poured out his grace for you. That's what it means. He poured out his grace in infinite grace. And that's what he poured out. His blood pressure drops. He's fainting, he's falling, and he becomes very thirsty. And we see that In the walk all the way down the Via Dolorosa where he falls and cannot go any further. We see that when he says, I thirst. In John 19:28. Jesus was in a serious critical condition before the nails were even driven in his hands and his feet. Jesus survived the beating and then went to the cross. Most men wouldn't even survive what he did. And his skin was already sensitive from the night before. So he felt everything. And you wonder why Jesus said, Father, if this cup can be taken from me. If it can. But those incredible words, Father, nevertheless, not my will but your will. What an incredible, intense prayer from our Savior. And why would we think he loves us anything less than he does? Because he knew the cup. He knew what was in that cup. He knew what he was going to go through. That's why there was such an intensity in him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus knew when he came into Jerusalem, riding that donkey, and they're all waving the palm branches. He wasn't like, yes, I'm the king, I have arrived. You guys, he knew he knew what was happening. It's like later on you read Paul. Paul knew that going to Rome meant his death. Jesus knew going into Jerusalem meant his death. Trust me, he wasn't riding that donkey thinking, I have arrived. Because he knew what was laying in front of him. But he had a purpose. And this purpose was more than just what was laid out on Palm Sunday. He was born with the purpose. But he had a purpose that was foundational from the foundations of the earth. The cross was imprinted into our DNA. Jesus had to go there. It's a part of us. And it's foundational. This was the redemption plan from the beginning, and he had to follow through. And every detail was important. So, Romans. Death by crucifixion usually comes pretty quickly. Roman soldiers were used to seeing every symptom, and they were taught literally how to torture and how to kill. They were trained, you guys, for this. This was not you just put him in a few nails in and he'll eventually die, whatever. No, these guys were trained. They actually were trained on how to torture a body. How to torture someone just before they die and then back up. Let them heal a little bit and then you do it again. They were taught this. It was such a specific thing. Why? But every detail had something to do with our redemption. See, this is how the cross actually kills. This is how it killed with Christ. Low blood volume. His wrist and his heels are nailed. Now, it's not his hands, you guys. And it's not his feet, it's his here. And I'm going to show you a couple of different things. 5 to 7 inch spikes. The median nerve, there's a median nerve that runs between your wrist, and it also is the same kind of nerve that runs into your ankle. Okay, so you need to see a couple things. I've picked a not gruesome picture because I'm not trying to gross you guys out. But this is actually a Roman cross. The cross that we are used to seeing, the crosses that we wear, even though this is not really that kind, but we use a Renaissance cross. It's a pretty cross. It has a higher top. So it just seems it's the Renaissance cross. But that's not the kind of crosses they use. This is a Roman cross. This beam is what he would have carried. And it would have been strapped to him, and he carried it, okay? And they carried it. And then when they got up there, it actually has a little spot, and it fits into the top piece, all right? And then they put the sign up there. The sign is actually put in. So it has still the shape of the cross when the sign is on it. And they would have carried the sign ahead of Jesus, and it said the King of the Jews. And they would have put it there on the cross. This is what he would have carried. See the little notch, and it fits in there. So here's the cross. Now we always see Jesus on the cross, and we see the Renaissance view of Jesus with his arms out, which is correct. But we always see his feet put in front of him, foot over foot, and that the nail goes up through the heel. Can you show me the side? This is actually accurate. This is actually more accurate to the way that they did it. And I was trying not to be gruesome, but this is the only picture I can get. So, this is actually more accurate. They would actually put a little platform of wood. There's a little piece of platform wood here, right here. And then they put wood on the outside of the ankle and they nailed this way, sideways. And this was so that they could put their ankle up, their foot down, and they could push up to try to breathe. See, what kills on a cross is the asphyxiation. They're hanging there. Usually their arms are dislocated. They've dislocated their shoulders, they're totally stretched out, and they can't breathe. They can't get enough air. So they push up on that heel to try to get air. Most of them suffocate to death. You can remove that. Most of them suffocate to death, or they come and they break the ankle, the knees. They come and break their legs so that they can't push up anymore, and that's how they end up dying from asphyxiation. But Jesus didn't die from asphyxiation. This is what this doctor is actually explaining, which is totally accurate to, if you go back and look at all the prophecies, none of Jesus' bones were broken. None of his bones. And he did not die from not being able to breathe. In fact, he gave up his spirit.
Yes, he did.
He said, Father, into your hands I release my spirit. He let go. But what was going on medically inside of his body? What was happening? So this is what this doctor was explaining. He had low blood volume. He'd already poured out a big portion of his blood. What little bit he still had was because his body was trying to fix it. In the little bit of rest they gave him, remember, he got a little bit of rest in between things. But his wrist and his heels are nailed, 5 to 7 inch spikes. It goes into the median nerve in the wrist and the ankle. And when it's pierced, it sends pain, kind of like hitting your funny bone over and over and over. So imagine that. We hit our funny bone and we're like, oh my gosh. And we start laughing, and then we cry, and then we laugh, and the emotions in it, because it's a weird nerve. You hit it, and it makes your whole body shudder. Well, imagine this happening in both hands and both ankles. And so now you have this nerve, and it's like hitting it over and over, and it's like it's pinched in a vice, and now it magnifies pain right through the whole body. So he's feeling this, and every time he wants to breathe, he has to push up on that little piece of wood that they've got underneath his foot and push against the nail. He's actually going to push against the nail that's in that nerve in order to get air. So now I'm feeling it even more. The nerve is like a vice being crushed, and pain so bad. The word excruciating actually means out of the cross. There was no word that they had to explain the pain. So what happened is they actually made a new word. Excruciating is a new word that was created, and it means out of the cross. That is the pain that he was going through. Excruciating. There was so much stress on his body, his shoulders are dislocated. You'll see this in Psalm 22. Check out Psalm 22 sometime. It totally describes what happened to Christ. You ever want to minister to a Jew? Tell them to go read Psalm 22, because there's Jesus. Right there. Hanging like that means a slow death by asphyxiation and they can't breathe. But with Jesus, because of the blood loss, because he had gone through this beating beforehand, he was dying from a blood problem. He would push on his feet to try to get air. Yes, that was going on. But he was also dying of exhaustion and blood loss. Breathing would slow. His heartbeat would get erratic. Jesus was suffering actually from congestive heart failure. He was in pericardial effusion, which is where fluid builds up around the membranes of the heart. And then Jesus chose to give up his spirit. How do we know that that's what was going on? Because medically, this is what doctors said. As the soldiers went back to break the legs of the others crucified, a soldier noticed that Jesus was already gone. And so just to make sure, because remember these guys were trained. They were trained just as much as this doctor was. That's what he's saying. And just to make sure, he went up and put a spear up into the left side, up underneath the rib, into the heart. And what did the Bible say? Blood and water flowed. When this happens, he actually pierced the cardio fluid that was around the heart. All the fluid that had built up, because he was dying of congestive heart failure, and blood and water flowed, and Jesus died. But he had already given up his spirit before that. And this doctor actually wrote in here, he said, Jesus died of heart failure. He died of a broken heart. Soldiers were taught to punish and kill, and they knew whether or not someone was dead or not. So they would have been punished had they not done their job thoroughly. There is no chance, this is what this doctor is saying, there is no chance that Jesus got off that cross alive. Because a Roman would have had to die for it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have happened.
That's right.
So he didn't get to go lay back in a bed somewhere and heal. The American Medical Association in 1986 said that Jesus was dead before the spear pierced his heart. Because of the amount of blood and water flow, his heart had already given up. Because of the amount of fluid that was around it. These are proven facts that Jesus died that day. And we know that Jesus gave up his life for us. Yes, there's faith in it, but there's also fact, you guys. So here's some facts. Dr. Metherall, even if Jesus hadn't have died this way, he could not have walked around the next day.
That's right.
You don't recover from these types of wounds. You don't heal in 3 days and then go show yourself to someone. These are the kind of wounds that don't heal, that kill. Other questions that he asked in his research, this gentleman. Why would Jesus have not fought back to save his own skin? He was willing to endure the punishment. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't defend himself at trial. And he was willing to subject himself to this humiliating, agonizing form of torture. No human does that. What could have motivated him to endure the cross and lay down his life, like the Bible says, a ransom for many? I'll tell you what motivated him. Love. That's what motivated him. Real love, God's love, the kind of love that makes you lay down your life for a friend. Jesus had a promise to fulfill from Genesis. From the beginning, he had a plan to accomplish. Our redemption to pay. His heel had to be bruised by that cross. His heel had to be pierced by that nail through the olive and the acacia wood. Michael, can you pull up the piece of that heel real quick? This is actually a picture of a heel bone that they found at the time of the crucifixions. They've been able to date it. This is actually a piece of the heel and how they would have done it. There's actually, when they show it in some of the other photos I've seen, there's actually another little board that was underneath it. But this is just to give you an idea of when they nail the heel. What's really interesting is they went in and tested this bone. And they went in and tested the wood that it was nailed through. And there was two kinds of wood that appeared. One was olive wood. The actual tree, the actual cross, was the olive wood. But then they kept coming up with the acacia wood. And they were trying to figure it out. It's because the piece of the acacia wood is this, right here. And then there's a little platform that they stood on. This is the acacia wood, and it went all the way through. Now, that may not mean a whole lot, because you're like, okay, what does that mean? There's two different kinds of woods. It means a lot, if you understand. First of olive wood is the national tree, pretty much, of Israel. So when you're talking about olive wood, you're talking about Israel. You're talking about the humanity, okay? Mm-hmm. But acacia wood is the wood that the Ark of the Covenant was made of. It is incorruptible wood. It shows the divinity. Mm. Jesus was nailed to both kinds. Why? Because he's 100% man and he's 100% God. So his heel has both kinds of wood in it, mixed in. It has the olive and the acacia. And he is 100% humanity, 100% God. And both woods were found. So Genesis 3:15. I'm going to read this in the New King James so you can see this. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. And he will bruise your head, and you will bruise his heel. This was God's promise from the beginning. That when I do this and I bring redemption, you may bruise his heel, but I'm going to bruise your head. And who's he? He's talking to the devil, remember? He's talking to the serpent. In the NIV it says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers, and he will crush your head and you will strike his heel. He will crush your head. You may bruise my heel, but I'm going to crush your head. Well, how did Jesus crush his head? We see his heel bruised. We see that his heel was spiked through on the cross. We see the acacia wood and the olive wood, and that he's 100% man, 100% God. We see all of these things, but how did he crush the serpent's head? We know that Jesus went to hell and got the keys of death, hell, and the grave. We understand that, okay? But how did he really crush Satan's head? Did you know he actually crushed it literally? We understand that he crushed it spiritually, but he actually crushed it literally too. God is a God that does things weirdly. I look at it and I think, wow. Because we think sometimes when he says something, he means spiritually. When God says stuff, God is beyond that. He can do something spiritually and physically at the same time. Because he's outside of both of them.
That's right.
He's so much bigger than we understand. So how did he do this in the physical sense? Well, I'm not going to go into grave detail, but you can go and study this for yourself. But 1 Samuel 17:54. David drags Goliath's head off to Jerusalem.
That's a big head.
That's a big head. Goliath was anywhere from 9 to 14 feet tall. Why? Because Goliath was a giant, but Goliath was known as a Nephilim. The reason why David judged him the way he did and dealt with him so harshly was because Goliath was an offspring of a fallen angel. Who's the offspring now? I will put enmity between you and offspring. He's talking to the devil. So the devil had offspring. Goliath's one of those offspring. And so he takes Goliath's head after he chops it off. I already put a stone in it. You know, David, this little guy that was probably no more than 5.5 feet tall, because he was in his teens, drags this big giant head to Jerusalem. 1 Samuel 17:54, and he drags this head off. He buries the head, and this is according to, and I went and looked in tradition, he buried it outside the gates of Jerusalem. What's outside the gates of Jerusalem? Golgotha. Why is it named Golgotha? Goliath of Gath. It's named Golgotha. We make this bigger. It's actually called the place of the skull because it looks like a face right here. And it's called the place of the skull, Golgotha. Now that's not Goliath's head right there, but he buried Goliath's head outside the city. This is a series of hills in this area. But he buried his head somewhere in there. That blows my brain. Because when David cut off Goliath's head and he dragged it over there and buried it, I don't even know if he understood what was going to happen. Did he understand that what he is doing was set up back in the Garden of Eden? This was set up, planned long ago. God had plans in detail, you guys. In detail. And when he told the devil, you may bruise his heel, but watch what happens, because I'm going to crush your head. I'm going to take you out too. You think you took Jesus out. And this is our victory. This is our victory. Our Savior may have given his life on the cross. And he may have died. But you guys, there was still a tomb and there were still 3 days waiting. And he didn't stay there. No matter what we go through, and I loved what you preached last night about Palm Sunday. No matter the Palm Sunday that we go through, whatever we see coming, all the things that we have going on, there's always a resurrection around the corner. You know, you've heard the story about, well, you may have a Friday, but there's always Resurrection Sunday. You know what? You may have a Palm Sunday where you know what you're going to go through. You know what you're going to face, but there's always a resurrection around the corner. Because God never intends us to not live in victory. Jesus went through all of this to give us victory.
Yep.
So that we could be overcomers. But this was planned, you guys. This didn't just happen by accident. It was planned in great detail. Jesus fulfilled this plan from the very beginning of the world. He planned it, he set it into motion, and he fulfilled every part of it. Redemption to whoever believes in him and what he did. He gave his life for us. His heel was bruised, but he crushed Satan's head. Jesus bore our sickness with every lash of the whip. Jesus broke every generational curse with every drop of blood. He tore the veil and he gave us full access to the Father and to the throne. He defeated death, hell, and the grave, and he took away death's sting.
Yep.
He died to give us eternal life. And again, he gave us the power to choose to serve him.
Amen.
And to come to him. And we can have all of those things that he purchased for us. The cross is more than just a symbol. It is life to who all believe. Don't just see this season as another mere moment to hear about the cross, or Palm Sunday, or Passover, or even the resurrection. We need to see this season as it's our life. Your very DNA is fashioned and saved by the cross of Christ. You're held together by the very thing that saves us, by the cross. It's not just a symbol, you guys. It's our life. Can you pull up that song by David Carter, please? During this song, I'm going to ask the ushers to pass out communion. And we're going to take communion today. And we're going to remember what the sacrifice that Jesus took. I know you'll take it multiple times through this week. Listen, communion is something we should be taking a lot. We should be grateful for this sacrifice and what Jesus did, because, you guys, he poured it all out. All 5 liters of blood, it was gone. He poured out all his grace. He poured out everything he had. He gave all of it. He held nothing back. Father, we thank you for sending your Son, that every plan that you made, you did it in detail because you knew the redemption, that you were only going to do this once. And it needed to be done once and for all. Thank you for the redemption. Jesus, thank you for your body being broken for us. Thank you that you took all the pain that you did. That every stripe that you took means every illness or disease is healed in the name of Jesus. I thank you for what you did, every scar that you took. It was for my healing. Jesus, we thank you for all that you did, Lord. We partake remembering what you did. In Jesus' name. Jesus, we thank you for your blood. We thank you that you poured out grace.
Yes.
You poured out all of it.
Yeah.
You had nothing left. I thank you that you gave us all of your grace, not just a little, but all of it. I thank you that your blood, every drop that fell, every place that you shed it, you meant for our redemption, for our freedom. All that you accomplished and all that you did. Jesus, we don't take it lightly. We do not take your sacrifice lightly. Thank you for redeeming us, giving us back what we gave away, giving us back dominion and victory. Thank you for all that your blood purchased for us. Thank you for your sacrifice. We take this and we remember. We remember. And we don't take it lightly, and we're not going to forget, Lord. In Jesus' name. Jesus, we just worship you this morning. We give you all the glory. We give you all the praise, Lord. Thank Jesus for all that He's done. Jesus, we just worship you. We praise you, Lord. We just worship you. We worship you, Father. Jesus, we worship you. Jesus. Yes, Lord. Thank you, Jesus.